Hello there, nice to have you with us. Is renewable energy a good investment? That's one of the things we're going to be looking at in this show. And to that end, joining me in the studio today is Mike Peo. He's the Head of Infrastructure, Energy and Telecommunications at Nedbank Capital. Mike, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Nice to have you in the studio with us. Is this a good investment?
Jeremy, it's a very complex question, but the short answer is undoubtedly yes.
Okay.
It's a complex question because it's been going through its various trials and tribulations internationally. We have had Europe post-2008 with the financial crisis, a number of countries reneging on renewable energy investments or regimes under which these investments have been financed. In Europe, it has been these projects are unbelievably prolific across Spain, Portugal, Italy, as the countries have gone through recessionary type climates, a lot of them have cut back on this type of investment. So for international developers, operators, etc., there have been some pretty tough times. The flip side of the coin is that because South Africa has been rolling out a massive renewable energy program, it has created a new opportunity. And so for South Africa, I think it's undoubtedly a very good investment opportunity, and I'll explain some of the dynamics. But also what it has done is it has added to the order books of a lot of the big international equipment suppliers, operators and developers, where as international markets have started to shrink, there is this massive burgeoning opportunity starting off in South Africa and increasingly spreading up the continent into Africa.
I remember quite a few years ago now, my wife coming to me and saying, I think we should, and the females do this sort of thing right, when it comes to investments, because I think males, we're a bit gung-ho about them. Females think their way through these things. And I remember my wife coming to me and saying, you know what, we should look for a fund that only deals in products that are related to water purification. And this is now a good few years ago.
Right.
And we managed to find one and invested in it. And it has done pretty well for us. It's a fund that invests in companies that make pumps, for example, right, or water purification plants and all of that. I think it was her sort of long-term view on water is going to become a very scarce and very important resource going
Absolutely.
Forward.
So the two fundamental crises existing almost across the world at the moment are going to be energy shortages and water supply, so undoubtedly. Okay. And the two are actually quite interrelated because unfortunately a lot of the older technologies require quite considerable amounts of water usage. So as you generate power at coal-fired power stations, for example, there's a massive water requirement. So the two are very interrelated. But to the investment question, there's no doubt that the interest is picking up unbelievably. A lot of the institutional fund managers have specific mandates now that are looking for sustainable solutions. They're looking for good social investment into projects that fund clean energy, water scarcity, the water picture becoming slightly more complex because there aren't that many investment opportunities, but undoubtedly we'll start focusing on water security and that line of investment will definitely pick up.
Is there still a pushback against renewable energy? Because there was at one stage. Is that still there?
Historically, it has been a far more expensive form of energy compared to the carbon-based technologies, coal-fired power stations, etc. The problem is there's never been a real factoring in of the carbon consequence of the old technologies, the older coal power stations, etc. So when you're balancing them, you're balancing something that is brand new. It's you bring a Mercedes into the garage and it does all the most beautiful things. It's very efficient, but it's a little bit more expensive. But when you measure up against the old Land Cruiser, you're not really comparing the Land Cruiser, which spurts out old diesel fumes, with any consequence for that condition. So more and more so, it's becoming a very important part of the mix of any country's overall energy supply. We're seeing the continent starting to embrace it quite quickly now. Our business is currently working on a whole number of projects in South Africa, but increasingly we are working on renewable energy projects in places like Kenya, and almost the whole continent is now looking to bring it into the mix. So on a balanced basis, if you balance up the need to do something from a carbon efficiency perspective or bringing in sort of cleaner technologies, the renewables are more expensive, but on a weighted average basis are allowing you to balance your portfolio. Major institutions around the world are saying we will no longer fund old coal technologies, so you have no option. To raise money to fund new energy generation, you have to look at either balancing it with clean coal or renewables, and the price point does lift up, which by implication means the tariff to the end user is more expensive. But on a balanced basis over a portfolio, you don't want to shift from 100% coal to 100% renewables overnight, because the economic imbalance would be massive.
I'm going to come back to the costs in just a moment, but I'm going to throw another impossible question at you here. Where should we be in that balance between, for want of a better term, the old technology and the new technology?
Okay.
What would be our sort of range right now? Where should we be, and where are we?
Okay, so South Africa currently we've published something called the Integrated Resource Plan 2010, which is about to be revised by the Department of Energy. That set out our plan until 2030 for energy generation, for new generation capacity, balancing it with the old power supply. So very simplistically, we had approximately 80% of our entire power generation was historically old, dirty coal.
Okay.
And we were generating somewhere in the region of 48,000 megawatts of power per annum. The intention is over the next 20 years to shift that to bring it up to about 80 to 90,000 megawatts. So we're almost doubling the capacity in this 20-year window. But the shift will be to at least a 50-50 mix between the old coal and increasingly the new generation capacity that's coming on, the Kosilis, the Madupis that are very much in the media at the moment. Those are much cleaner coal technologies, but the next wave will be almost entirely renewable. But included in that renewable mix are items such as nuclear. Nuclear is still forecast to take up about 10,000 megawatts of the 80 megs of new generation capacity. Nuclear is regarded as renewable clean technology. And then the balance will come from wind, solar, and other forms of renewable energy. So we are going to get the mix right, I think. If we carry on with the investment plan as outlined by government, we have a significant shift away from the old, really dirty technologies to the newer, cleaner technologies.
It just does seem a little bit bizarre, though, that we've got all of this energy available in the form of wind. Go live in Port Elizabeth for a few years, and solar. I mean, every single home in South Africa should have some form of solar power, even if it's only the geysers that are solar powered, which draw a huge amount of the electrical demand. It just seems bizarre to me that we haven't started looking at this, or we didn't start looking at this years ago.
Yeah. Jeremy, I think you're completely right. I think the white papers that came out in the early part of this decade did talk to this renewable energy, but it was the crises that have always, as usual, pushed us over the edge. So the crisis is what's really forced people to look at it quite seriously. So Eskom has taken two views. They've got to build new generation capacity, but that takes a lot of time. A new coal-fired power station might take you 4 to 6 years to build. Nuclear takes you somewhere in the region of 8 to 10 years to build. A wind farm will take you 2 years to build. So we've jumped onto the bandwagon, but on the flip side, what they're looking at the same time is energy efficiency, and they're looking at subsidizing or encouraging people to use renewable technologies in their own lives, putting up solar panels, swapping out their old energy inefficient geysers for solar power, for example, using heat pumps and so on, and they're providing a subsidy. So there's a bit of a balancing. It's saying reduce the load or the demand on the existing system, and then let's build the new generation capacity. But the problem, I mean, again, to talk to the problems with renewable energy, most forms of renewable energy, apart from things like nuclear, are still, they really are not baseload power. They're not. You only have power from a wind farm when the wind blows. You only have solar power being generated during the daytime when there's radiation from the sun. So at the moment, the very expensive crossover point is storage of that power generation to be used at the peak times, for example. So historically, your early mornings and your late evenings are your peak power demand times from residential users. Very often, that's when the wind is not blowing, when the sun is not shining. So storage has been part of the mix, but again, one of the reasons why South Africa in particular is embracing renewable technology is the technology around storage of power from renewable energy is becoming increasingly cost efficient and being brought into the mix.
Let's go back to the costs now, because I read a document that my producer forwarded to me from Greenpeace, which was related to a Mail and Guardian article on the cost of power coming out of Medupi,
Right.
which they reckoned, I think it was somewhere around 94 or 97 cents a kilowatt hour. And they were looking at renewable energy, which was coming in at around 87 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, I don't know if those numbers, I would imagine a publication as reputable as Mail and Guardian would have done their homework on that. That to me doesn't make sense. We're spending all this money on a thing like Medupi, which I understand is part of the mix. So you probably have to do that. But why is the renewable energy coming in cheaper? And why aren't we then pushing that side of the equation more?
Okay, so I think that is one of the big reasons why government is now pushing the renewable side increasingly. So currently there has provisions been made to procure 3,750 megawatts of renewable energy. That was the first phase of this renewable energy program in South Africa. That would involve about 120 billion rands worth of new investment.
Okay, so you said 3,700 kilowatts, 3,750. So at the current output, that's about 10% more or less.
That's approximately 10% of current generation capacity.
Right. And that costs about 120 billion
rand of new investment.
Right.
Medupi is 4,600 megawatts of generation capacity. So almost, 10% more than the entire program.
Yeah.
The problem is when Medupi was first costed into the system, the numbers that were being talked up were 64 to 80 billion rand. We're currently hearing that that's almost doubled, and we still don't know where the end price will end up. So I'm even curious as to whether the Mail and Guardian numbers really have in mind what the true end price is. The problem is that is as a consequence of major issues in the procurement cycle, which have caused a 50 to 100% overrun on the original price. And that also does not factor in any of the carbon tax potential consequences of procuring thermal power from coal generation. So on the renewable side, we are seeing pricing anywhere from probably 80 cents a kilowatt hour to about 110 cents a kilowatt hour, because there's a whole mix of different technologies and they each have different price points. But in reality, we'd forecast that within 2 years, the cost of the renewable energy would probably normalize with the new build tariff that would be coming out of Eskom. So it gets to a point now where that's the imperative for the investment, because once upon a time, literally 5 years ago, the price would have been sitting exponentially higher. So in the first round projects that closed in December 2012 on the renewable procurement process happening in South Africa, or subsequent to that, from between rounds 1 and 2, in a 6-month window, the price of photovoltaic, solar power, the tariff decreased by 40%. That's in a 6-month window. And it is probably it's probably now leveling off. But again, I think if we really compare the true costs of the new build to this renewable power, I think we're getting close to a very levelized cost of power.
We need to go to an ad break now. I want to come back to part of this costing and then go forward and see what we should be doing and how we should be doing that. More with Mike Peo on renewable energy investments after this break. Stay tuned.